Steering wheel, somebody tell him to give it to me.
There's something loose between my legs.
I don't know. Let go!
I'm heavier than a freaking boat.
Nothing he's could say could make that any better.
Yeah, nobody. No more radio for the rest of the race.
I'm going home.
Hello and welcome to DRS FC, an F1 podcast by soccer nerds. I'm a soccer nerd. I am Donald. I'm here with two fellow soccer nerds. First off, we have Deepti. Deepti, how you doing this evening?
I'm good, Donald. This is going to be an interesting episode, very different from what we're used to. So just kind of ready to talk about all that's going on.
Yeah. And for those of you who did not see our review of the Chinese Grand Prix, that was a lot of fun. This may not be as fun as I bring in Meghan, who is our resident bundle of fun. Meghan, how you doing?
You know, what don't you love about pending wars and how they impact the sports around us? Is that not fun for you, Donald? I don't know.
Living in Washington, D.C.? No, not a lot of fun at all.
Listen, D.C. and I are in the Midwest, which, you know, sometimes the Midwest gets some hate. But I got to tell you, when I look at those nuclear war spy game or war games, the Midwest seems like we're doing okay for most of it.
I'm from the Midwest. It sounds like I need to come home for
an
extended period of time.
Come on home.
But as we're obviously discussing, we're talking about the fact that the Saudi Arabian and the Bahrain Grand Prix have both been canceled. We talked a little bit about this on the Chinese Grand Prix review, and I wanted to get Deepti and Meghan on here because they didn't get a chance to have their take on everything, and we're going to talk more in depth about what it means for the world, what it means for Formula One, which feels trivial considering we're talking about war, but that is what we have to do here and kind of break that up. So with that, let's just expand on what is going on as of right now. Obviously, those two Grand Prix have been canceled, not postponed, canceled due to the ongoing war in the Middle East. They will not be rescheduled. I think they tried to find ways to either move the races elsewhere or move the race to later in the calendar. Later in the calendar is very much packed with races and just other times. And we'll talk a little bit more about what they tried to do to maybe salvage this. But in the end, they realized that they just couldn't so early in the season. They couldn't really get a replacement going on. So this will be 2 races off the calendar. The calendar will be reduced to 22 races in total. I think 2 of the locations they tried to do were Portugal, Imola. They considered that. They also considered Turkey. I saw in a different report. Obviously, Turkey would be just as weird a situation of trying to get everything there. The real reason is that all the freight that has to go there, all the people that have to go there. Sometimes that starts weeks in advance. And for these particular races, they were going to start shipping things today. And like this week. So you can't really do that right now when the airspace is closed, when the Strait of Hormuz has been the biggest news topic because of the fact that it's closed due to the ongoing struggle. So there's no shipping lanes, there's no air traffic. You can't get people there. You can't get people there safely. And so as a result, they decided they need to cancel that. Meghan.
Yeah, if y'all have never watched any of and I say this with not an ounce of sarcasm, truly fascinating content about the logistics of F1 and the shipping involved with F1, a lot of different organizations, including DHL, have done like behind the scenes features on it. They have to build a city basically every single weekend. They have to build all of the spaces for not only the garage, essentially. In some places, the garage is already built, but they have to set it up. But they're building all the hospitality spaces every single week, pretty much. There's like 5 or 6 venues where they don't have to do that, but for most of them, they are. So if it's not just the car or the team that they have to get there, they really do have to bring a whole logistical support. Also, by the way, they're not just bringing 2 cars. They're really bringing more like 4 cars because they have to be able to replace all these parts. So there's just a lot more logistical headache involved with making a change, particularly when the folks who are working in supply chain for these teams have already planned it down to the minute to try to be as efficient as possible. Completely changing a setup is really detrimental to their process.
Yeah, and I should note that it's not just the Formula One race that has been canceled over the 2 races. It's also Formula 2, Formula 3, and F1 Academy. All were set. So all of those teams, 11 teams of the F1 grid, you got maybe another 20 or so drivers and teams on the other circuits. That's a lot of people and a lot of freight to try to get to those places when right now they just can't do that. So because of that, there will be a 5-week gap after Suzuka next weekend. They will have a 5-week break period until they come to Miami the first weekend in May. Now, the one thing that I was kind of surprised at, and I'm sure the two of you were kind of surprised at what the FIA did, was kind of realize and look back in history and see where they attempted to move on and press on throughout a military conflict, and the PR was terrible and the safety issue was bad. So let me take you back a few years ago to Jeddah in 2022. Just as they were about to start FP1, the Houthis attacked a oil depot by Aramco, which is obviously a sponsor of Aston Martin, 10 miles from that circuit. And they hit it with drones, they hit it with missiles. Obviously, there's a famous picture of cars actually running while there's smoke billowing in the background from these strikes. It was that close enough where people were like, what are we doing here? So during FP2, they see the smoke, they see how close everything is, they realize that this isn't over, and so they kind of delay it 15 minutes. They then proceed with the rest of FP2. Then all the drivers had a meeting at like 10 p.m. local time, and for 4.5 hours, they discussed whether or not they needed to continue. The end result of that was that they decided to continue with the rest of the weekend, going on with qualifying and going on with the race. Part of that was that they kind of felt boxed into a corner because at the time it was reported that they were warned of, quote, the consequences of not racing, end quote. And what that meant was if they decided to boycott the race in Jeddah, they were worried that their exit visas would be denied and they would be kept in Saudi Arabia for failure to adhere to contracts and things like that. So that was a really big deal back then. And that was the first thing that a lot of us thought about when this situation was brewing. And it feels like FIA did the right thing.
Yeah, I don't want to ever have to say I'm handing it to Liberty Media and the FIA because I pretty much always disagree with them on things. This is the one time where I've appreciated that they saw, hey, things were really bad last time. We made the wrong mistake or the wrong decision. We're going to learn from our mistakes and make the right decision. Just some more historical background. We have not had races in the Middle East for this is a relatively new in the scheme of F1. It really only started happening in the mid 2000s, and Saudi Arabia specifically hadn't had a race until the 2020s. But additionally, we used to have drivers boycott races a lot more. There used to be a more of a collective union solidarity. The GPDA is not like a formal union, but it used to function more like that. Really famously in the 70s, they boycotted races for safety after many drivers were dying. There's just been a lot of collective action in a way that hasn't happened recently. And so while I'm glad they made the right decision to do this, I was sort of curious if this was finally going to be the time that we had collective action from the drivers. They have different incentives these days. They're paid much more highly than their compatriots of the past, and they are much more individualistic in that way. Like they're much more of a brand of themselves and not brand as a Formula One in general. And so that's just kind of an interesting historical side note of like, I'm glad they made the right decision. I am still curious what would have happened, and we'll talk a little bit more about the ramifications later in the season and kind of what might happen with drivers there.
And I think the difference between now and Jeddah 2022 is that in 2022, the drivers were already there. The freight was already there. Everyone was there racing when it happened. So it wasn't a matter of, oh, we can't get people there. We also even have to go back to the fact that, Aston Martin has claimed and a couple other teams were worried about the first race of the season in Australia because when this conflict happened, they still had freight in Bahrain from testing that they needed to get to Australia that they couldn't get out. There were people there that couldn't get out because the airspace was closed. So this is a different thing where they're kind of saying we can't send anybody there, so let's call this off. Instead of back then, it was more of do we continue? We are all still here, but do we continue with what that race is? So that's a bit of an overview of where we are at right now. As we kind of did a little bit on the last episode, I want to get Deepti and Meghan in here because we obviously haven't heard your full take on things, and we wanted to give you this platform because this is your platform as well, to be able to share that. So Deepti, I'll start with you, your general thoughts on all of this shit that's happening.
Yeah. It's a shame, really, is like my first thought is like that all of this is happening. And I think for us, it's extra like weird in a sense to be in the country that basically started this conflict. Like, of course, the conflict's been, brewing for ages. And, but like, truthfully, yes, we were the ones who started, whether it was defensive or not, it may be up for debate. But it's just, it's kind of weird being on this side and not really having any control, obviously, of what's going on. But also as a fan, it's just weird. And what comes to mind, I guess, more, and like we said, we're an F1 podcast by soccer nerds, and we see a lot of things happening politically in the soccer world as well. And people just love to say like, oh, don't conflate politics and sport, and like they don't belong. But like you can see in every situation, anytime there is like a political conflict, sport gets involved in some way, and it like affects the sporting world even if you don't want it to. Like we see that happening with the World Cup because we're supposed to host the World Cup coming up in a few months. And so I guess I mean, obviously like my main thoughts is like, yeah, it's disappointing, it's annoying, it's frustrating. I just hope for like the well-being and safety of all the people there. But it's also, I guess, I mean, we should use our platform and this platform to say like, yeah, sport is inherently political and there shouldn't be separated, and like you shouldn't just kind of sit back and just be like, okay, whatever happens. I hope, I mean, I don't know if any of the drivers have said anything. I think Kimmy was just asked briefly about it and was just like, oh, I'm like, I hope for the well-being of all those over there, that he's the only one that I saw do something. But yeah, I kind of wish like even the drivers would say something about it or give like their perspective. But like Meghan said, they're their own brand. They probably have their own like PR rules and whatever about what they can or cannot say. But yeah, I guess TLDR, it's disappointing and it's frustrating. And yeah, I like obviously wish it was a different situation.
And I think just for our podcast, and thank you for your thoughts, by the way. I think they're spot on. It's hard. I think I could just see, obviously people can't see you, but I can see just how conflicted this thing is. And it's the same for all of us because we're one of the few F1 podcasts that have Americans on it, right? So we're one of the few podcasts that have the unique perspective and the responsibility to say something about this. And I think, to your point, I think, Kimmy, I thought I saw Carlos Sainz say something, or somebody, or Fernando Alonso saying something to the effect of like, hey, we hope everybody's safe and, we're really sorry. And we'll, hopefully get back there. Like some, run of the mill tagline, generic corporate thing. And I don't mean that disparagingly. It's just, they probably don't have the information. They're all focused on getting to Japan, and they know that this is something
to be honest,
that can affect it.
I don't want them to have opinions on it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, these are not highly qualified. I mean, other than them saying like no war, I do not want these guys who have no basis in reality to like give me their political opinions, because probably I don't agree with them, and
Fair.
Probably they're really bad. You know what I mean? I want less.
They're rich enough that you have to hold that question.
I want less guys in Monaco telling me what I should be doing with my body and with my politics, to be fair. And I think Deepti's 100% right. Like, as Americans on a podcast, it's by the way, Americans who don't agree with this action at all. I think I can just universally say that for our pod. It is really hard to come on here and be like, and to know, by the way, that the U.S. isn't losing their GPs. Like, we're not impacted by this, even though we kicked off all this action. Is really hard. And I'll just say, like, personally, it's also really difficult to reconcile that while I am handing it to the FIA and Liberty Media for making the smart choice, they're making the choice because they had the realities of a PR nightmare if anything happened to anybody, even if it was just a fan attending or somebody on their way attending, God forbid, someone affiliated with the teams, or worst of all, like during the actual race. Like, they're not doing this to be the good guys. They're doing this because they have weighed the pros and cons. We know that. It is still nice to see some reality in a situation from a sports organization, because I have been so trained to not expect even the bare minimum of goodness from these folks. And so that is really frustrating on one hand. And like on the flip side, as a fan, I think it's okay to be disappointed that they couldn't figure out a logistical nightmare. I think on the flip side, I don't think anyone should be like harassing drivers or teams and being like, oh, you deserve a pound of flesh in some way. But it sucks for these fans that that was their primary way. Even if I don't think personally, speaking for myself, not for the podcast, I don't personally think the FIA should be doing business with folks who don't believe that all folks should be protected and safe in their countries. There has been a lot of discussion about we're doing races in countries where women or minorities or folks who are gay or trans can't be their full selves. But by the way, that's America now too. So, you know,
that includes
like
us,
that's
yeah.
a much bigger political conversation. But yeah, when I mentioned earlier, we did not always have races in the Middle East. This has been controversial. And again, I'm saying this as a privileged American. So 100% recognizing I have egg on my face in this fight. So.
And it's, I don't think it's a coincidence that after Japan, the next race is going to be in Miami, right? Like, we've canceled the Middle East leg of this early part of the season for them to come to the place that started it. And so that's not lost upon me. And it's quite frustrating from just the perspective of that we have to get on here and be like, this is stupid. This war is stupid. And it's going to, it affects what we as a country, not any of us on this pod, but what we as a country has done has affected the world. And they didn't sign up for this. Bahrain didn't sign up for it. Saudi Arabia, we could probably have another podcast on that, but this is not something that should be happening because of something that we as a country did. And so I really feel for the people. And I think, if you want to take a pound of flesh from the FIA, it was the fact that they canceled the Grand Prix and they offered people like, oh, you can use your ticket at another Grand Prix this year. These are not cheap to get to. These are not cheap tickets. They are not cheap accommodations. They are not cheap flights. And the answer of, oh, just go to another race, it'll be fine, should not be the answer for this. And I'm sure some people are very upset at the fact that all they pretty much get, they don't get refunds either. They just get you can transfer your ticket to another race, which means they're probably out money that they spent, and now they have to spend more for this ticket that apparently is only valuable but at another race. And so, yeah, I think that in the coming days, there's going to probably more from the FIA about this, and I'm sure fans will have their say, especially the fans, as we get closer to that event, fans who were planning on going to that. I think those people will have something to say, and I think the FIA should listen to them and really make them right, because they're the people who did not do a thing, and everything is gone up, and they are the ones that are stuck holding the bill of this whole thing. So with that, let's take a quick break, and now we're going to talk about the trivial stuff. What this means for the season, what this means for Formula One, what this means for the upcoming races. We'll talk about all that on the other side. All right, we are back. We continue our discussion of the cancellation of the Grand Prix in Saudi Arabia and Bahrain. Both of those were set to take place next month. Instead, we have a 5-week break coming up after Japan. And this is the part where we talked about the important stuff. This is, we're an F1 podcast. This is our love. But this is the trivial part of this conversation, is what happens to this year, to the championship race and all the little stories that are within it. And I want to start with the fact that there are 2 fewer races now. That can be a boost for some teams. It could be a detriment to others. And I think we start with the fact that Mercedes has 2 fewer races to take advantage of a loophole that they had figured out that had just been kind of decreed would come off the books after the 8th race. And so what is this loophole? It's a compression ratio loophole. And what it was is cars are required to have a max compression ratio of 16-1. Numbers that only matter in the course of this particular conversation. We're not going to get into the whole diving of the scientific part of why that exists in a car. But that is only when it's stationary, when it's when it's standing there cold at 16-1. Mercedes figured out, hey, if we have these parts that can expand when the car gets up to temperature that you would have out on the track, but when they do, it gives us an extra, a bigger ratio, an 18-1 compression ratio, which in layman's terms will increase your horsepower by 30, which doesn't seem like much, but when everyone's kind of flatlined at one point, you get 30 extra horsepower to get ahead. That is why Mercedes has been hooping so far this season. Now, that is supposed to come off the books. They kind of say you can keep using this, but after the 8th race, it's gone. With the 2 races being canceled, they now have 2 fewer races to use that compression loophole. And on the flip side, you have someone like Ferrari, who's 2 races closer to saying, okay, now we have a level playing field and we have a great, our start is great. Our car is able to get off the line quicker. And now we don't have to worry about them using their extra horsepower to catch up to us. We're going to have a level playing field. So that start is even more important. And we got that juice and it's within the guidelines. So this is something where Mercedes is probably saying, okay, if this was later in the season that these races were, then they get to keep this compression. They get to build a bigger gap, and the constructors and both Kimi and George can kind of separate in the drivers' championship. Now they don't get those 2 races, and now it's a little bit sooner before Ferrari can probably look and say, hey, if there is any gap, we can start making it up quicker. So, Deepti, I'll turn to you. Your thoughts on the Mercedes compression loophole ratio and kind of what that does with 2 fewer races.
Yeah. I always think it's funny when, I mean, I'm always on the side of the teams that do figure out a loophole and use it to their advantage. And I don't like when, if the others complain and then like the FIA decides, oh, we're going to change it to make it more level. Like you should have thought of a loophole. Like, I don't know. I always love finding loopholes and working around it. Kind of similar to how, like you said, Ferrari has like the smaller turbo. So they're able to get off the line faster and literally get up to speed faster. And yeah, I mean, it's just Mercedes, I think they said they would like with the 30 horsepower, they got like a 0.4 second advantage per lap or so, which is a lot, obviously. So yeah, it definitely works to their advantage. They could have built a bigger lead, definitely in the constructors. Is like even when after June they're gonna start, they're gonna have to get rid of that. It's not like they're gonna lose a huge advantage in terms of like how good their car is. Like their car still, that's not the only thing that makes their car the best. Like they still have 2 really strong drivers. They still have like a really good engine and everything. And so I think, yeah, it'll just be closer. Anyway, we're seeing that it is like Ferrari versus Mercedes. It's just going to be even more so that. And yeah, if you're a Mercedes fan, you're going to probably be a little bit hurt, but it's still going to come down to good racing at the end of the day. But yeah, it will be, what is that, 50 points in the drivers' championship and constructors, I guess, plus second place. If they're going to be on the podium each time, just build it as much as you can and then try to continue that for the rest of the season.
And neither of them were sprint races. So,
right.
So at least they had that where they're not losing even more points. I feel like with that, I feel like the FIA, if one of those was a sprint, they would have tried to figure out how to make another sprint happen. Maybe not the Grand Prix, but say, hey, the sprint will just be moved to another race. That feels a little bit easier for them to do than moving an entire race, which obviously comes with a lot of red tape, as we lawyers say. Megan.
Yeah, and I was just gonna piggyback off of that. Like, in addition to losing this time, one of the things that I will kind of hand it to the FIA for is that F1 is going to lose about 100 million pounds. I unfortunately do not know what that means. I'm not good at math.
We're not converting that.
In hosting fees, and like that is a pretty significant amount. Now the TV money is still the same, right? Like they're not getting debited for losing those 2 races, so there's no decrease in TV money, but there is a decrease in hosting fees, so they will lose out a little bit. We also mentioned like logistically things are going to be off. I assume that this is going to cost the team some money in getting that logistics figured out. I don't know how that goes towards the total cap. I assume that the FIA will make some sort of exception, and only sickos like me are concerned about those things because I'm curious like how ultimately, and not all of that goes towards the cap, but like some aspects of cap might be affected by this. So we'll be curious to see kind of how that works out.
I think the logistics part is probably the interesting thing because you would think it would be easier to get all the freight from Japan to the United States, but it's not. It's just as hard. The Pacific is 10,000 miles wide. So even if you put it on the ship, it's going to take a long time for it to get across. You can't put a lot of stuff on planes. And we've talked about the fact that even getting these guys around is a little bit difficult because there is a shortage on private jets in the world. So there's a lot of like air traffic nowadays, and getting these guys, getting the people there, getting them back home has been where they've been buddying up and taking some, like Kimmy, I think, took a commercial flight, which they do from time to time, but there's different angles that these guys have to do to kind of air quotes make sacrifices. I say that as guys who are very, very rich and make a lot of money, but everyone on the team is taking a hit as far as logistics, and it's been they're gonna have to figure out those things. They at least have 5 weeks to do it. Deepti.
Yeah, I'm just curious. So you mentioned earlier in this episode that, they thought through all the possibilities of what to do. Like, can they replace it with Portugal, Imola? I think they even considered like doing 2 rounds in Suzuka or doing I think one of the guys in Australia, whoever runs that, he was like, oh, come back to Adelaide, let's bring Adelaide back to the grid. So it seems like they really did think of everything. I am actually curious what their reasoning for not doing back-to-back in Suzuka is, just because it's not a street circuit. They don't have to shut down anything around like main roads for that. So obviously I don't know all of the logistics and the fees behind it, but I'm sure there was a reason. But essentially, we now have a spring break that is as long, if not longer, than the summer break later on. So I'm curious, okay, will they do something during the summer break? Is that part like built into the contracts where they absolutely can't do anything still, or are they able to adjust that in some way? I'm not sure. I feel like if they really wanted to put 2 more races back in the calendar, whether or not it's in the Middle East, I feel like they could. But obviously, I'm not part of, like, I don't know all the details behind it. It just seems,
I think part of it is logistically, it's going to take them all of that 5 weeks to get it the other direction because they can't go.
They can't go.
West.
They can't go west.
Yeah, they have to go the other direction. My understanding is like part of the problem is that they could not get to those other races without kind of stopping in the Middle East or like getting through the Middle East.
Gotcha.
And so instead, because they have to go, again, boat logistic nerd here. My guess is now they're going to have to go through the Panama Canal, which like is a whole other issue of logistics. Like we have some problems going on with the Panama Canal too. If you guys remember about a year ago, we said we were going to take it away from the country. So it's like a logistical nightmare that direction and a little bit too. Less of a logistical nightmare, but still, I think it's going to take them the full like 4 weeks to get over.
Yeah.
And we're not done with this. Our the president, the guy down the street, has said that they're going after Cuba next. That would drastically affect logistics in the Caribbean and getting people, even if you get through the Panama Canal, having to do that because, when the capture of President Maduro from Venezuela happened, a lot of people outside the United States don't know this, but they shut down the airspace to the entire Caribbean, all of it, for at least 2 days, at least a day, and in some places more than a day, sometimes two. And so again, with that on the radar, it's hard to, they're like, maybe we should start getting this stuff over here now so that if there's any issues, any hiccups, we can, we can adjust to that and we have 5 weeks to do it. I also think, and Megan, I'm glad you put this in here. They're still probably going to talk about this. I don't know that part of me says they're not settled at just saying there's going to be 22, because later on, if this continues, we have 3 races that are going to be affected by it even further. 1 at the end of the summer, and then 2 at the very end of the year. If this continues for, an indefinite period of time, I know it may have been able to stave off Apple and Sky Sports with getting 2 off the calendar. If you get, more, they probably need to start conversations with them as well. And I'm sure they're going to try and figure out, okay, what are our contingencies here? Are there, sure, we may have lost 100 million in hosting fees by canceling these 2. Can we get some of that back by hosting another race somewhere else? And can we get everything there? That's going to be the question that I think will persist, even though they've said on record they're canceling these 2 and they're done with trying to reschedule things. I think in the back of their mind, they now know that contingencies have to be made.
Yeah, and specifically what Donald is referencing is that there are 3 races towards the end of the season that hypothetically have been highlighted as maybe ones that we would continue to be concerned about cancellations. So the Azerbaijan GP is in September, at the end of September. The Qatar GP is the last weekend of November, and then Abu Dhabi to end the season is December 6th. We do not know when they would need to make the decision. Part of what was interesting about the cancellation this time is that they actually gave us a date they were going to have the decision by, which was helpful, I think, for people knowing, they're actually considering canceling this if they're telling us we're making the decision by February 20th. We don't know yet if they're, Lord willing, this doesn't continue on, because that means lots more people dying and lots more tragedy for folks in this region. But we don't know when they would have to make the decision for that September 26th race. And we don't know the possible ramifications. November, particularly the last race of the season, I think at that point they would have to find an alternative for that final race.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially given how close the Constructors' Championship, the Drivers' Championship could be at that time, that's why in my mind I'm thinking if they think this is going to continue for an indefinite period of time where, again, the end of the summer and the fall is going to be affected, they need to start making those contingencies now, because the last thing they want to do is look back at this coming break, at that summer break, and say we could have done something, but we didn't, and now we're really screwed as far as logistics. And again, this is all trivial, given the ramifications of this. This is the least thing to be concerned about, but that's what the FIA is tasked with being concerned about. Let's get into some of these final thoughts that you may have. Deepti, I'll start with you.
Yeah, some of these final thoughts, but I just have a couple questions that, I don't have the answer to, you might not have the answer to, but just something I've been thinking about. Also trivial in the grand context of things. But number one, like we mentioned, it's not just Formula One, like Formula 2, 3, even the F1 Academy are affected. Those ones were set, like F1 Academy is set, I think they were set to race in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia in April. They already have much fewer races, and so it'll just it just makes each one of their other ones even bigger. And for you should go back and listen to our F1 Academy review, because we mentioned how it goes. These girls in this in that league get only 2 years in it to prove their point. And so for this year, having they have 2 races each weekend, 2 fewer races, that's a lot out of 6 that they get to do. And so for them, it's a big thing. Should they reschedule? What are they going to do? Blah, blah, blah. Same kind of thing. But I feel like for going from 24 to 22 versus going from 7 to 6 or 6 to 5, whatever the number is, it just makes that even more so there's more impact on that end. That was one question I had. And then number 2, Drive to Survive is still filming. I'm curious how they're gonna talk about all of this.
Yeah.
If you remember, I don't actually remember what they said about the Jeddah race in 2022. I might have to go back and see if they covered.
I don't believe
that
they mentioned it at all. So that was the year I want to say that they did the instead of the chronological order of the season. They did just episode of teams, and so you
Yeah.
kind of got the whole season in hour-long bites every single episode. So I don't think they really, talked about that.
Right. But I feel like they have to now because it's going to be such a long break. They obviously, they'll be able to skip it if they want to, but I think it'll be good on them to cover it a little bit. And then thirdly, just what are the teams going to do for the fans in this meantime? Like, how are they going to keep fans entertained, let's say, on like socials, just keep them in the loop, or just keep them excited for the rest of the season, because we've only just started, and so having a big break so early on, you might lose some of that momentum that we've gained just in the last few weeks.
And I think, Sky Sports obviously has been around for a long time in the UK in covering F1. They probably know how to kind of scramble and figure out something for this break because they're used to the summer break. Apple isn't. This is their first year. I'm sure they're less than thrilled at the fact that two of their properties have gone bye-bye, and they're now having to figure out, how do we get people to this platform for 5 weeks? And again, they will be fine as far as money's concerned. I'm not worried about their pockets, but the attention that they have been getting for having Formula One and the rise of popularity of Formula One in this country because of stuff like Drive to Survive, people are coming to there, and the last thing they want is for people to show up on a Saturday and a Sunday, and there's no Formula One race, and they go, okay, never mind, and they go to do something else. They want people to come to the platform. They're going to have to figure out how to continue to attract people to their platform in these 5 weeks. Meghan, I'll turn it to you for the last word.
Yeah, I just think in a lot of ways, this is really sad that it's come to this. It's really sad, the ways in which the folks who are living in this region are affected, the way the fans have been affected, the way teams have been affected, and how much everybody is scrambling to kind of figure out what the next steps are. But I just want to highlight that, like, we as a show have never said stick to sports. That sport is inherently political, and that is, a lot of our beef with F1 and with some of the F1 teams boils down to recognizing the ways in which sports are political, and sort of denying the ways in which they have been involved in political acts before, and the way that sports reflect life in a lot of ways. And so I just want to kind of close on that note, that we as a show really do think that sport can be used to make things better, and it is really disappointing in the times it is used to whitewash things, or to sort of pass along bad behavior. And so in that regard, I'm really glad to have a group like us that kind of stands up and says our values and still has fun and is silly on Delulu Island, and then can come back and do a podcast like this. So we appreciate the listeners for joining us tonight and letting us kind of say our piece. And we hope that it kind of helped you process through this as well.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the two of you being on here. Obviously, Andre, Ebony, and I had our take on things, and so I'm glad that you were able to do that. I'm sure we'll get Kyle on here at some point and let him have his thoughts, because like many, we're going to try and figure out how to get through this break with content and things like that. I'll probably watch Drive to Survive finally. It's March Madness here in America. It's a busy time, but I think there's definitely going to be opportunities for us to keep everyone engaged, and even, again, maybe do what we kind of did at the beginning, where we kind of introduce some of the teams, do more of a deep dive on certain topics that we know and love. But I will say, to end this, everyone who is listening to us or happens to listen to us, and if you know people, if you have family in the Middle East, may they all be safe. I know that sounds that may be taken one way or the other because it's coming from Americans, but we genuinely do care about the safety of everybody out there. We hope everybody is well. We hope that this conflict is over soon, because no to war, and we just hate that we are forced to have to watch this and be the aggressors in this as a country. We hate it as Americans. So hopefully everybody there remains safe. Hopefully all of you out there remain safe wherever you are. And again, thank you to Deepti and to you, Meghan, for being on here with me for this. We'll be back at some point. Obviously, we have a race coming up again in Japan. We will obviously preview that. and then we will get ready for a break by trying to fill your feed with content either on our Instagram or our social media or here on this podcast feed. So for Deepti and for Meghan, I'm Donald. Thank you for listening, and vroom vroom.
Vroom vroom.